All right, everybody, let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll get back to it. All right, so we're going to get into a little bit more about Christianity. We're going to talk about LGBTQ plus Christians, same-sex marriage within the church, and transgender in the Christian and within Christianity. So there has been a lot of church reform and liberation theologies, which really look towards working to heal and mend the harm that has been done within the church, and or talking about how to be more inclusive within churches. Gay and lesbian theologies, which place the gay and lesbian experience at the center of the theological process. They arose kind of in the 70s in response to a lot of discrimination that happened within the 50s and the 60s. Queer theology, which really, again, focuses on more broadly how to be queer or outside of the normative within Christianity. So that not only looked at just specifically like lesbian and gays, but also looked at more broadly the conversation surrounding normatives, just surrounding what it means to be any specific gender within the church, what it means to be with any specific sexuality within the church, what it means to be possibly holding to religious ideologies within there. It's really talking about breaking the normative. Respect and justice reform. So they talked about the book Gay on God's Campus, which is done by a former professor of mine that is at Oklahoma State University, who really wrote about what it means to be a queer person at a Christian campus, and what kind of those specific out Christians on those campuses are doing to provide themselves spaces to butt up against traditional ideologies, and how they really adapt and or don't adapt to the harms that can come from being on a Christian campus. Black Lives Matter has always kind of tried to find affirming ways in which Christianity can be built upon and be inclusive to the LGBTQ plus members within the Black community. Black liberation theology takes it a step further and really talks about how Black liberation is tied to specifically Christianity, its works within the civil rights movement, and how now it is looking towards other individuals and minorities that are oppressed, along with how those intersect with being a Black person in this country, and really works to use Christianity as a platform to have hard conversations. And then really talking about how art and music and anything that is artistic and creative has always been used as a way to provide reform or really resist or be resilient within any particular oppressive spaces. So same-sex marriage in the church, again, is one of those really hotly debated conversations. However, same-sex marriage is overabundantly in this country supported. However, there is a lot of Catholic opposition. Protestants, again, become divided by this. Some have been part of this practice since the 70s, including like Unitarian Universalist, and some more recent is like that divide in the Methodist Church and the Episcopal church, where there is now a more traditional sect and a sect that is not as traditional and or is more inclusive, and those become welcoming and affirming churches. Some are very opposed to this, including Southern Baptists and the Church of Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints. These kind of churches will host things like you see on here in pictures. They hold a lot of rallies and a lot of political movements to try to get rid of same-sex marriage, and are working towards that currently through our court systems to try to get it back under center stage and the highest court in the land. So evangelical Christians are the biggest opposition to trans people, and policies that specifically cater towards inclusion of them, including societal policies of bathrooms. They are the biggest proponents of these bathroom bills and the biggest proponents of these really negative and harmful myths surrounding trans people. They like to use trans people as a moral panic to provide a rallying point for political power and for certain political like talking points, as opposed to really talking about facts and or the impact and harm that those things can do to our LGBTQ plus youth. I also included a chart here to talk about the different forms of Christianity and kind of where they stand on transgender inclusion, just for knowledge sake. So we're going to get into the Jewish faith for a little bit. There are three main really sects of the Jewish faith. There's Orthodox, Conservatives, and Reformists. So Orthodox are going to be your most staunch traditional, trying to keep it as close to its original form as possible. Your Conservatives are going to lean towards some of those more traditional ideologies. However, they are going to have some inclusions and understand that as time changes, things like there are certain things that are less capable of doing just because of the way products are made, the way things are shipped, the way things and society operates at this point. And then you have the reformist version, which is really progressive and usually works towards inclusion and really works towards trying to get rid of and or make and or acknowledge, I guess is really the word I'm looking for, the harms that have been done in the past. It also works to understand, to work from the history of its own oppressed people during the Nazi regime, to really work towards making sure that there are no other populations that experience or feel that by their own hand. And so there's really an acknowledgement of how history changed and informed kind of new ideologies around this within this particular religion. A lot of those in the Jewish faith believe that it was their Bible was written by God, but that it's adaptable and it can evolve and change depending on the context. We have the second largest in the U.S. Jewish population. Only Israel has more Jewish people per capita. Gender, sex, and Judaism. So it's considered highly sexist religion, mostly because the divine female imagery is almost completely invisible. It lacks women theologists and female leadership. There's very little female in religious stories or rituals. Within the reform category, there's a little bit more conversation and or lax understanding of the roles women can play and or should play. The older sex view women as sexually devious and in need of being controlled. There are other ideas include that sex is natural, but again, when they're talking about that, they're really talking about sexuality in the form of male. So really hindering that idea that women are kind of gatekeepers and men are really looking to do that now that sex between a married man and a woman is natural. And that's split between kind of that traditional and more reformist ideologies. Monogamy and marriage is always the ideal characteristic, and birth control and abortion are really non-issues within the Jewish faith. Same-sex females and bisexuality is really not addressed within the Torah or any Bible for that matter. However, the same passages on same-sex male interaction that Christians utilize, they feel are up for kind of interpretation. So there are gay synagogues that exist in multiple cities and countries around the world and within the US. Gay leadership and marriage is accepted in both conservative and reform practices, but not in Orthodox. Gay is kind of a natural variation or considered to be something that is really a non-topic for 2/3 of the Jewish branches. Bisexuality is considered a choice, and even by gay Jews, they considered to be really an outlier. So biphobia has really looked at this aversion towards bisexual individuals or groups, and it really talks about and really that hammers down this idea of if it's your choice, then you need to pick one or the other. You can be gay or you can be straight, and we'll support you in either one of those decisions, which can't be both. This monosexist idea assumes sexual orientation naturally fixates on one sex as opposed to having the ability to fixate on more than one sex. Orthodox Jewish has no tolerance or acceptance of trans individuals. However, in 2015, Reformish Jewish faith had affirming policies, including using chosen name and pronoun use, affirming clothing and gender transitioning, gender neutral bathrooms in their churches, and it became one of the most affirming religions in the U.S. All right, so we're going to talk about Islam again. I will reiterate, Islam is a very wide spectrum of belief systems, and even Muslim itself is a wide system of belief systems, just like Christianity, that has a wide range of ideologies and practices that can be as inclusive and patronizing and or as inclusive and or as patronizing, depending on what the geographic region was, the politics of the area, and or what particular how they view the Quran itself. So the Quran is filled with Muhammad's lives and lessons. And there's also another written text that is essentially Muhammad's sayings and or really his quotes. There's two branches, the Sunni and the Shia. I said that wrong and I apologize. The Sunni don't believe that religious leaders are a higher class, and they tend to be more progressive. 1% of the population is in this country is Muslim. Gender roles can be very strict. Women can be very isolated and can include head coverings. However, veils are hotly debated, and only have half of Muslim women in the U.S. wear them. And they can, and head coverings and veils are, so the hijab and the veils themselves are two different pieces of cloth, two different religious practices. Whereas hijab generally is felt to be very non-invasive and considered to be more progressive, and it's also considered to be more of a personal choice that garners and depicts their religion with God, similar to women wearing crosses and or things of that nature that denote your specific religion and your specific commitment to that religion. So it is not considered something that is oppressive in any way. However, veils in multiple regions, there's a lack of choice on whether or not to wear that, depending on the political region you stem from. And that has more to do with politics and geography than it does with the actual Muslim faith. So a reminder, Muslim faith itself is not the oppressive force, but it is generally the politics surrounding that particular religion that denotes those oppressive forces. Sex is natural and considered a positive part of life, though it's really focused again on male sexuality. Purity is highly emphasized when it comes to females. So homosexuality among men is criminalized. In 2 countries, it's punishable by death. Sexuality is considered a choice. Women have less penalties, but are viewed as breaking the sex without marriage ideas, and that in and of itself creates problems within this religion. In the US, there's a greater amount of tolerance. Same-sex marriage is debated because they feel the government should not regulate marriage, but on the flip side, they don't believe necessarily in same-sex marriage. However, trans variations within gender variant individuals, usually those that are assigned male at birth, are incredibly, have always been accepted within the Muslim faith. However, it is considered natural. Trans surgeries have been legal in Iran since 1987. However, it's much more supported than same-sex couples. However, depending on the geographic region, again, tolerance varies. It recognizes gender. Muslim practitioners recognize gender identity disorder, and they at points can experience multiple marginalizations because as a Muslim person, there is a lot of anti-Islamic ideologies here in the US that create a marginalization in and of itself. So having that multiple marginalization of being trans and Muslim in this country can be incredibly dangerous to the individual. And so generally speaking, the mosques here in the US tend to be more inclusive to help alleviate some of that multiple marginalization. All right, so I'm going to stop here and then I will do one more on LGBTQ families, and that'll be it for today. Again, if you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to ask. You can call, email me, do whatever you need to get in touch with me, and we can work out some of the logistics of any of the conversations we're having, as I know that those can be very hard to have.